This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Is it possible to literally scare the devil out of somebody? Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. That'll be our topic for discussion this week. But before we dive into that, please take a moment, if you would, and download our free app. The app for your mobile device, whether iOS, Android, or Amazon Kindle Fire, gets you all of our content, not just this weekly program, but our weekly broadcast program, Unraveling Revelation, our weekly podcast, PID Radio, Peering into Darkness, and our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship, plus classic episodes from our podcasts going all the way back to 2005, the prophecy interviews we conducted with speakers at events like the Prophecy Watchers Conferences, the Future Congresses held back, well, more than 10 years ago. Now, all of that in the palm of your hand, and the best part of all is that we won't be canceled from our own app. There's also a messaging feature there where you can exchange thoughts and ideas on the programs, ask for prayer, and do so off of the internet in, and I hate to use the term, but safe space. And we will endeavor to keep it as such. So if you get a spare moment again, especially if you're watching on YouTube, and we do appreciate you YouTube viewers, this is a virtual Mars Hill, and we'll try to stay here as long as we can, but their playground, their rules. If at some day they decide that we've violated the community standards, we could be gone. But if you've got our app, we will always be there. gilberthouse.org/app, gilberthouse.org/app. You'll also find a link at vftb.net. Look in the menu bar for that link. Joining us to talk about horror as we continue last month's Iron and Myth Roundtable discussion. This is our 20th program, 20th Iron and Myth Roundtable, as we share some examples of horror that might actually teach some spiritual truth, perhaps even unwittingly. We've got the founder and senior fellow of the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology and the author of Interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes with the Nephilim, on the Nephilim, that is, Dr. Judd Burton, best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter Brian Godawa, and the author of Giants, Sons of the Gods, now available in a new 10th anniversary revised and expanded edition, and the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, Doug Van Dorn. Fellows, welcome back. This will be a conversation that continues where we sort of left off last month. We were so long in the discussion of the use of horror as an apologetic that we didn't really get to many examples of how it is used, or maybe some of our favorite examples. But Brian, your experience with Hollywood is, gives you an insight that the rest of us don't have. Why is it, and maybe this is a dumb question, maybe the answer is obvious, that in so many horror films, the storytellers are willing to delve into the supernatural realm for the problem, the villain or what have you, but they avoid what would seem to be the obvious solution, which is, God, the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ.
Gee, I wonder why. Yeah, although actually I do want to say that I'm actually surprised that how often, which is not often, but compared to zero, of course, that there are actual horror movies that at least do deal a little bit with the spiritual side of things, and even with Christianity. It's not always as biblical as we would have it be, but I'm grateful that there are still some positive examples of the faith in movies and series. I think you and I have talked about that one, Evil,
Evil from
again,
CBS, right?
Not necessarily biblically perfect or anything, but at least it shows positive Christian faith, to some degree in some characters. And it shows one of the benefits that is in a lot of these, even secular movies, is that they'll have by very nature of the genre, horror, supernatural horror, you've got to have a skeptic in there. The person who, I don't believe in the supernatural, and then they become convinced by the experience. That's just standard genre formula, right? So that's good, right? Because we live in a kind of society that has that scientific context to the worldview, and so that's always helpful to have that skeptic that is converted, or at least humbled, let's put it that way, humbled by the supernatural reality. That's one step in the right direction, But there have been movies and series, and I think what it comes down to is the individual creators. So if you have creators, writers, and directors who are believers of some kind, then you're going to then you will occasionally get them, And classic example for me is the Scott forgot his name, the guy who did The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Scott Derrickson. He's done several movies, Deliver Us from Evil, Exorcism of Emily Rose, where he does deal with, he's a professing Christian, and he has dealt with that spiritual reality with, a more positive Christian worldview, not as explicit as others, But then I'm also brought to mind is The Conjuring, the movie, The Conjuring, at least the original Conjuring. I think the writers were actually Christians, and so they did this demon possession story based on a real story. But they actually did. It's one of the few times where they had the name of Jesus be the victory over the demon, and that was amazing. But fair enough, far and few between for sure.
Doug, as a pastor, how frustrating is it to you to see this trope beaten over and over again, where it's the ingenuity of the humans involved or our works that overcome evil?
I mean, it's I guess it's to be expected, right? I think what Brian said, it's when you're not expecting it, that's when you're pleasantly surprised. I mean, people go into the movies to get some sort of, generally speaking, any kind of a Christian worldview or whatever. I don't even know what would make somebody think that, right? But I mean, it's part of the war that we're part of, that the supernatural does not want people to know the truth, and so it's a great pleasant surprise when and you get it in horror, as Brian has said before, more than certainly most other genres, maybe all other genres, maybe all of the genres combined these days, for all I know. It really is surprising how often you will see Christ. A lot of it's Catholic, of course, but I guess that's to be expected in some ways, because they're one of the few that are actually still supposedly doing exorcisms and stuff like that. So.
Training priests. Judd, you did your dissertation on one of the sites is kind of a ground zero for this supernatural war, Banyas, the base of Mount Hermon. And you have also undertaken a long study of the tropes of that are common in horror, and trace them back to these watchers of the pre-flood era and some of the evil that they brought to this earth. In fact, I cited some of your work in a piece that I wrote for an anthology that Tom Horn published years ago called God's Ghostbusters on vampires. And I cited your work, and that was picked out by somebody as, can you believe these guys claiming that the angels in Genesis, are they crazy or what? Well, yeah, but not in the way they think. Judd, how do you see this manifestation, these tropes, vampires, werewolves, mummies, ghosts, demons, golems, whatever, zombies, and trace it back to some sort of supernatural truth?
Well, these themes that show up in our literature and cinema and TV and whatnot, popular literature, popular culture, float on the same cultural ocean that a lot of these other things that happen in reality, going all the way back to the Genesis 6 event. And so they're these deep-seated, I suspect that the reason, looking at it anthropologically, the reason that those tropes, those ideas are so deep-seated in humanity is that they represent real experiences that people have. Whether we're talking about vampires or werewolves or ghouls or any kind of preternatural or purely supernatural manifestation. One of the things that I always point to in terms of of why these themes are so perennial, why they're so recurrent, is just to go crack open some of the ethnographies from the golden age of anthropology, where your ethnographers are recording these stories from peoples who still pass their ideas and myths and morals along orally, and they find connective tissue to similar ideas that go all the way back to antiquity and, in fact, prehistory. And so it shouldn't surprise us a great deal that these themes show up in our popular culture, because they're seated on more fundamental and more significant levels in terms of human culture.
So in other words, we're just recycling things that have been handed down to us from the Sumerians and the Akkadians and other.
Well, to a certain extent, but in terms of popular culture, those are often reinterpreted within the given society, even though there may be perennial universal elements that connect them together, and they show up in things like at least in Western culture, particularly American culture, they show up in our movies and TV programs and books and comic books. So in a way, we're recycling them through the creative lens on a popular level. But there, as I pointed out, there is this historicity. There is this representation of real experiences, shared experiences that happen in real space and time throughout human history.
Well, this month, I really hoped we would get to some examples we could point to of film, novels, television series, miniseries, even maybe comic series or graphic novels that actually did manage to convey some spiritual truth, even if it's by accident. Brian, what are some of the things that you might turn to that would be your favorite examples of a good message coming out of something that was presented to the public as just pop entertainment?
Sure. Well, I could actually just address the genres itself and their elements of each genre. But before I do, I wanted to just say that, piggybacking on what Judd was saying, each cultural era, as culture changes and adapts and shifts, it does adapt and change these notions. There's always been blood drinkers. There's always been shapeshifters all the way right through history. But our modern era, I think, has been, I would argue, probably been heavily influenced more than anything from the Victorian era of the development of these themes, because this is when you have Dracula coming out. This is when you have the Invisible Man. This is when you have Jekyll and Hyde. This is when you have
Mary Shelley.
Frankenstein. Frankenstein, my favorite. My favorite of all. And so it's really, I find that very interesting. In fact, I recommend a book called Monsters from the Id by, I think his name is Michael Jones. He talks all about this, and it's really helpful in understanding how do we get to where we are today, or at least the influence of the modern viewpoint. So it's kind of interesting because that's why so many of those monsters reflect actually, if not Christian ideas, certainly Christian influence, right? The whole Dracula thing there's a very much of a link of the life is in the blood, and there's Christian symbolism there. There's the Jekyll and Hyde again is the evil nature, two natures, warring within us and such, and these kinds of things. And of course, Frankenstein, even though she was not a Christian at all, but she was very much expressing through religious concepts, the very misery that her people, Shelley and those guys were actually bringing upon the world with their worldview, the monstrous worldview that they were creating in a very real sense, So that, yeah. So I in that sense, you can see, vampire stories, again, they can be adapted to different themes, but if there's always that notion of, the blood as the source of life, and the blood is also the the cure for the monster, the disease in different ways. One of the movies I really enjoyed was I Am Legend, which, Will Smith, it's technically like the original, going back to I Am Legend. I think that's what they kind of went back to, but I think it was more vampire-ish, and certainly Omega Man, which was the best, adaptation with Charlton Heston of that novel by Richard Matheson. But very fascinating because, the original Mega Man, they were more vampire-ish, and they had a whole Christ imagery. Charlton Heston was like a Christ figure, and he dies in a crucifixion pose, I think. But even the new one, in this more secularized version, the whole blood, there's very much of a subtle Christian, much more subtle, but it's definitely there, that the blood is the salvation. Blood lies salvation lies in the blood, and he's the one man that has it, that kind of a thing. So those kind of components are certainly there in a way that I think points in the right direction. Does this justify, do I say then they're Christian movies? No. I think as Christians too, we have to be careful that we don't find Jesus or the gospel in everything as if it's literally there, rather than reflections in it through a distorted lens of godless man. Even though they're godless, they're still created in God's image, and therefore they're still truths that point in the right direction. But we have to just be careful, not go to the extremes of, therefore it's all okay, and or it's like, oh, there's blood and gore in it, so therefore I don't. It's wrong. It's evil. It's promoting fear. That kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So just staying on the. I'll just do one more. There's lots of other ones, but I love the vampire genre. My favorite is zombies. We'll talk about that eventually, but since we're on the sort of kind of vampire angle, one of my favorite movies of all time, which is a very obscure art house film. It's not for everyone, but for those who really like thinking films and such, is The Addiction. And The Addiction is a vampire story, black and white, with Christopher Walken in it, and Lily Taylor, I think her name is. Anyway, written by a Catholic and directed by a Catholic, and it's very much, they actually do make the connection of vampirism as a metaphor for Christianity, for the evil nature in humanity. And there's even Christian redemption in it. And it's just really fascinating. But again, it's not as strong of story, not as entertaining as most Hollywood movies. It's more of an independent art house film. So be careful. It's hard to find because not very many people watched it. But it's just one of my personal favorites that I just, I recommend everybody, but you got to have the right constitution to watch it. Let's just put it that way.
Is that because they quote R.C. Sproul in it, Brian?
Yeah. So the vampires, right. So the story is that it's a philosophy student, Lily Tyler, or whatever. Yeah, whatever her name is. She plays a philosophy student at NYU, and she gets bit, and it shows her transformation. And of course, the vampires, since they've been around for thousands of years, right? They're really smart, and they quote all the philosophers against the people, the professors and students that they're killing. And to be honest, that was actually a movie. It's pretty old, but that was a movie that influenced my own novel that is coming out soon called Cruel Logic. Yeah, so they'll quote and they'll say, all your philosophers, this is what they say. So what's the problem? All I'm doing is what Feuerbach said when he said, we are all but stardust, and it's just like, what's the problem? There's no morality within that vampire world, So, and it also has one of the most, for me personally, one of the most powerful scenes that expresses the essentials, what the essence of the sinful nature is in man. When the Holy Spirit comes in conviction upon this vampire, she reacts in such a violent way that it really captures the heart of man's rebellion, against God, and how he doesn't want God in his life, that kind of thing. So anyway, kind of cool stuff.
Judd, what would you toss out there as a good example? One of your favorite examples of a message coming from a horror film or book, novel, whatever.
Well, one of my favorites is the series, the David Lynch series, Twin Peaks.
Oh.
89, 90. They just ran a couple of seasons, and they did a return season here, I guess about 6 or 7 years ago.
Very weird.
Go ahead.
Very weird.
Very strange, very quirky, what you would expect from a David Lynch production. But what I found interesting about it was, and in a lot of ways, Twin Peaks is kind of a predecessor to the X-Files, because you've got an FBI agent that's called in to investigate a murder that has all these supernatural connections. And spoiler alert, what you find out through the course of the program is that there are demons that are responsible for actually possessing the person that murdered the young girl, and it turns out that they possessed her father to actually murder his daughter. So that still stands out as one, although there are no necessarily overt Christian messages in Twin Peaks. I mean, there's an Anglican priest in the town. It's the head of the church, and you do get some of that peppered throughout the course of the series, and there are allusions to Christian and Western tradition. But I find it very interesting that this struggle, beyond just the investigation of the murder, involves this species of demons, which is not something that you get couched in those terms very often. It didn't do well, as I remember. The series didn't do well initially, but it attracted this cult following. And it's very popular amongst the fans, and I've recommended it a number of times to illustrate how there's this struggle between the protagonists of the series, who are all moral and upright individuals, juxtaposed against this supernatural evil that's been placating this town for centuries by the point of the series beginning.
The demon who they were tracking down, wasn't he just given the name Bob?
Bob, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just as
irony,
as banal as you can get. It's like, this consummate evil manifest among us. His name is Bob. It's Doug, what would you recommend?
I mean, I want to say just the classic things that everybody loves, because I'm drawn to all those things. We already mentioned Frankenstein, and I say this for my oldest daughter, who it's her favorite book in the world, and this kid reads 100 books a year. She just absolutely loves Frankenstein, and something Brian was talking about earlier, I just thought was really interesting to think about the Victorianism being kind of the root of modern horror. And here you have this story that was also called Frankenstein was also called the
modern Prometheus.
Modern Prometheus. And that's so interesting, because when you start looking into the myth of Prometheus, this is a guy who, in some of the versions, he created man out of clay. He is the one who gives us the knowledge of technology and all this kind of stuff, kind of a watcher sort of a thing. I mean, there's so many things that you would think have nothing to do with Frankenstein, but have with Frankenstein have nothing to do with what we talk about on the show. But in reality, it has everything to do with what we talk about on this show. And he just became, I mean, that show, the book, the movies, so influential in our culture. I think most people realize that, but maybe they don't realize just how deeply influential the whole thing really is. I mean, the whole idea of the word Frankenstein, and even the mad scientist. I mean, those ideas draw back to what Mary Shelley was writing. It's just so weird to me to think about how this era that when I think of Victorianism, you know, I think Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice and the Bronte sisters and Wuthering Heights, and here you have these horror books that are being written like in like this subversive way to show that this age that everybody idealized is not quite what it's made out to be, and then that can morph, you know, and start talking about the pitfalls of modernism or the pitfalls of postmodernism. And so that kind of leads me to what I think might be interesting for people is a lot of these horror movies, more and more so, I think more postmodern this culture gets, become very unsatisfying in their ending. You know, they don't resolve the way a Christian story does. They're not happily ever after. Sometimes they're very uncomfortable and they make you really mad. And I think that can be actually a really powerful way, if it's done right, through the horror of showing you that, yeah, it's not supposed to be satisfying. This is horror. And, you know, whatever it is that the particular horror is working on in the culture, and if it's doing that is with the culture, that's the better, I think. I think it's fascinating. One of those movies for me was this movie called The Witch. If any of you have seen this movie, it stars the girl when she was young who plays in the chess movie or the chess TV show.
Oh yeah.
Queen's Gambit. Anya Taylor-Joy. And this is a movie that's, they say in the beginning of the credits, what is based entirely on real dialogue from the Salem witch trials. So they made up a fictional story of it, and so they create this Puritan Calvinist family that gets kicked out of their local village, and they have to go live by themselves. And the way it portrays them, in a lot of ways, it's very classic American religion in the 17th century. I'd say probably hyper-Calvinism, but there's a lot of that was going on in those days. And then you have this horror story of all of a sudden their baby son is just gone. And then the next thing you know, another son is gone. And it plays on this idea of a witch in the woods. And, you know, I won't spoil the ending for people who want to see it, but it's a disconcerting movie that stays with you in a way that, the scare movies don't do. So, it's talking about truth on that supernatural level that makes you think and makes you wonder.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you were talking about Frankenstein, though. I was trying to find this because I remember I watched a really interesting series. It was back in 2014. It started, called Penny Dreadful.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And it was really cool because it was in the Victorian era, and the sort of the lead character was Frankenstein and someone related to him or something. But his story as Frankenstein went around, because he was more human looking, you know, he wasn't so monstrous looking, right? But they also brought in all other characters. Like they brought in who else did they bring in? The Invisible Man, I think.
Briefly, but they also had a Dracula character.
Dorian Gray.
Dorian Gray.
I think they might have had a werewolf. Did
they
have
did.
a werewolf?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Josh Hartnett was one, wasn't he?
Right.
Or something. But
and then Wes Studi.
And Dr. Jekyll was in it.
Right.
Yeah. I just, and it was really interesting because I thought that they really came close to dealing with at least this sort of, human nature, sort of spiritual transcendence. Where it ended up was, I didn't care for it. Like you were saying, Doug, they often they start really interesting and they often end up nowhere very good. But sometimes because I don't think that the storytellers really do believe in stuff like supernatural, whatever. So they don't know how to end it because, they don't really have any convictions about transcendent reality. So they've got to just come up with some weird, goofy ending or something. Yeah. Or usually it always ends in, it's for the birth of the Antichrist. That's the way it always ends up,
But that's what's so weird about it to me, Brian, and in a really ironic way, that if these guys are telling postmodern stories, postmodern ways, and they don't know how to end it, Like that's exactly what postmodernism is. And yet
No,
here they
you're
are
right.
telling
Yeah.
it, and it's just so it's surreal.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's
Yeah.
a good point.
The female lead in that was sort of the central character. She was being tormented, or she was being chased by
Yeah.
Dracula.
What was it?
Eva.
Oh, that's what it was.
Eva Green.
Oh, it was Eva Green. Oh my gosh. It's
Yeah.
been so long since I think I'm going to watch that thing again.
It's really
really
good.
was interesting.
We've watched it through about 4 times. Sharon watches it as inspiration for her Red Wing saga, which is set in Victorian times. So for her, this is like, really sets the mood, which I break because I'm sitting here in the next room, trying to edit, programs like this,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
kind of, anyway. But Timothy Dalton is in it. He's wonderful. There is, Josh Hartnett was really, really good. I forget the name of the young actor who played Victor Frankenstein, but the grandson of Art Carney from The Honeymooners played Dorian Gray, Reeve Carney.
He was good.
He was really good, and I've never seen him in anything else. So, and then in the 3rd season, I think it was, you had Brian Cox come in as Josh Hartnett's father, Wes Studi as the old American Indian werewolf.
Okay.
There were a lot of tropes that were at work in here.
And they did a great job of integrating them all. Actually, I love
It was
that,
really
you
well
know?
done, and that's why the following season, Penny Dreadful Los Angeles, or Penny Dreadful L.A., City of Angels, I think was the follow-up.
Oh, I didn't know that.
With Nathan Lane was really, really lame. It was really bad. Yeah, it was sad because it involved Santa Muerte and another female entity that we thought, okay, is this going to be like Inanna/Ishtar versus Santa Muerte?
But no.
But it was like, no, it's sad because they had Rory Kinnear, who played Frankenstein's monster in the first Penny Dreadful, played this was set in 1930s Los Angeles. And he was playing a German doctor who had emigrated to the United States, but was part of the, one of the committees there that thought that Hitler was all well and good. And of course, so they used it and got into some really woke tropes, which is like, okay, we get it. Yeah, white men are bad. We get it. But the first Penny Dreadful was really well done. It's just, of course, as you'd expect from Hollywood, the faith of the lead character, played by Eva Green, was just, it all comes down to the strength of your faith.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you say enough prayers? Did you believe enough? Did you,
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
almost, but not quite. But they did end it on kind of a note that suggested that she was saved in the end by faith, where she had to be, she had to die. Otherwise she would have become the bride of Dracula, and they would have instituted a reign of terror. There was kind of an interesting series there in the 2nd season where it was, according to the storyline, where Dracula and Lucifer were revealed to be twins who'd been thrown out of heaven because they'd rebelled against God. And then they were competing with one another for control over the earth, and wanted this particular woman because somehow she was going to be, I don't know, she represented like a Whore of Babylon type character that.
And she was really good. I mean, and she sort of embodied feminism, I thought. I mean, the way she was working it out and, condescending toward men and all this, and using men and all this, I thought like, that's kind of a little knock against feminism. It's kind of interesting.
What was really interesting too is the Victor Frankenstein character who fell in love with a young prostitute, and I'm forgetting the name of the actress who played her. She played Rose Tyler in the Doctor Who series. Anyway, she was resurrected by Victor Frankenstein, and she comes back, and suddenly she's lost her Cockney accent, her Irish brogue, and now she's speaking with very proper English. It's like, okay,
interesting.
And she's playing that she's really, uneducated. What is this? How women are supposed to dress? What are we supposed to wear? Oh, okay, corset. If that's what pleases you, Victor. And then suddenly you realize at one key scene when Frankenstein's monster, who wants her to be the bride of Frankenstein, comes back and she turns the tables on him, and you realize she's a lot scarier than Frankenstein's monster.
Yes. Very good. Very good stuff.
And then she hooks up with Dorian Gray, who is an immortal, and she is an immortal. So that was a thread of the storyline that they didn't really develop, and it was kind of disappointing. It's like we need to end the series after the third. Okay, let's just forget about that story.
Yeah, I think they probably lost the budget, or they weren't renewed,
Yeah.
and so they had to wrap it up. And so they did the best they could wrapping it up like that, for sure. You brought up this notion of faith, the real faith and such, and yeah, that's something that's hard to get out of Hollywood because they don't understand faith, but sometimes they do. There's this movie, End of Days, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, an old movie, and he's battling the guy who's trying to bring the Antichrist in, or he is the Antichrist or something. But the whole point of that message of that movie was specifically that Arnold Schwarzenegger, this action hero, he could not defeat Satan or whoever, Lucifer, whoever it was that was fighting. I don't remember, but he could not defeat him through physical strength and power. Only through faith, And that was really, of course, that's a clever irony, because we're going to do an action movie with Arnold in there, and we want the supernatural. What would be the theme? Well, naturally, if he's the action hero, writers and storytellers often think of, well, then whatever their strength is has to be turned into a weakness. So it fit really well with this physical, worldly strength versus faith. And the other movie that I thought did another great job about that, which is Constantine. That stars Keanu Reeves. It's an older one. I think the sequel's coming out soon, based on a graphic novel. Of course, we're all talking here about movies and series. A lot of them are based on books or whatever. But I think today that's about all what people do now is watch stuff. But I really like that too, because the theme of that was also Constantine felt that he was a guy who died and went to hell, and he had to come back, and he thought he had to work his way back to forgiveness or heaven by killing demons and stuff. So that's his job, his task is killing these demons. But I think the angel Gabriel or something comes to him as a woman, and the whole point is that he's like, no, you can't save yourself by works, only by faith, And I was like, wow, that was pretty amazing, to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Do
they work it out very much? No, it's some kind of a sub theme going on in the story, because obviously in the end he just has to fight the big monsters and stuff. But that was another example where I thought, wow, they actually brought out faith in a Christian context. Maybe it's not as perfectly as what the way the Bible might describe it, but certainly again in the right direction, I thought.
My favorite film, and it's not horror in the traditional sense, it's really like an attack of space aliens kind of movie, was M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. Because,
excellent movie.
Yeah, that one really, because I love me a good science fiction film, a good space opera, or Armageddon, or Independence Day was what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm all about a movie like that, and here you've got one that's played more for, you wouldn't call it horror as much as a thriller, I suppose.
No, it would be. It is a horror. It is considered horror.
Okay.
The aliens and such. Yeah, it's sci-fi horror.
A wonderful cast with Mel Gibson and Joaquin Reeves, and a good, supporting cast as well. Joaquin Phoenix, excuse me. You're right. It was only on the second time through. I mean, Sharon spotted all this right off. She's really good at this. It was only on the second time through that I realized, wait a minute, this is essentially dramatizing the biblical verse that the Lord works all things together for good for those who believe in him and call on his name. Even though the character played by Mel Gibson, the Anglican priest who loses his faith, takes off his collar because his wife dies in a freak, what appears to be random traffic accident where a local veterinarian falls asleep at the wheel and hits his wife while she's out for her evening walk. And he's called to the scene, and they show this through a number of flashbacks through the movie, that she had this message for him that's revealed in stages as in flashbacks through the film. And you realize as this scene plays out, okay, these alien craft have appeared over cities, and suddenly they've disappeared. Now they've landed. We've spotted them. Oh my gosh, they're like 8-foot tall alien grays, and they're really malevolent. And they've got a crop circle on their property, and suddenly the aliens are there, and they're trying to get in the house and try to hurt them. The story really is a retelling of, well, it kind of exemplifies the anger that Gibson's character felt at God for
a Job-like story.
Right. I hate you. I'll never pray for you again. And while they're in the basement hiding from these monsters that are trying to get him, and the son is having an asthma attack.
Asthmatic, yeah.
Right. And he's talking his son through it. I'm with you. You and I are one. You and I, relax, breathe with me. And it's like, wait a minute. That's the father speaking to this grieving husband. And then when they finally have that final confrontation scene in the living room with this alien who's got the son, and they realize that all the things that have led them to that point, both Gibson's character, Joaquin Phoenix's character, the failed minor league baseball player who led the league in home runs, but also in strikeouts because he could never not swing. And he realizes, the last words of his dying wife, tell Meryl, swing away.
Yeah.
Swing. And suddenly,
it gives you chills, man. Even talking about it,
I know.
It's really amazing.
That movie, even then at the final scene where you realize that he's healed, that the children have survived, they're happy, he's put the collar back on again. He closes the door in the house and you see the paneling on the door. It's not your typical 6-panel design that you find at a door. It's a cross on the door. It's like, could M. Night Shyamalan have been any more? I was almost obvious. But like I said, I'm slow, and it took me two viewings here to say, okay, we're going to watch this again. And when you see it, it's like, oh man, yeah, it does give you chills. That movie is that is one of a very few movies that I would put up there as don't ever make another version of this film because it is perfect.
Yeah.
Touching this film would be an abomination. Do not
leave it to a Hindu to have a movie about God's sovereign control.
I actually thought that he was. I thought that he was Catholic, Roman Catholic.
No, Episcopalian.
Episcopalian. Interesting.
Yeah, because he was married and had kids.
Well, in the film he was, but it's Shyamalan.
Oh. Well, he comes from a Hindu background, but I don't know what he's become. But
yeah, that
right.
I mean, I could totally be wrong, but that's what I remember hearing is that he was Roman Catholic, which is why him and Mel had such affinities.
Okay. Fair enough.
And that would explain what you just said.
Yeah.
Here's another one for you guys to think about it. This is a totally different kind of a genre. It's kind of the War of the Worlds genre, which originally come out, of course, Orson Welles on the radio and terrified the entire country. Mm-hmm. There's a fellow that I've been following. My sister found him really early on, so I'm proud to say I was within like the first 100,000 followers. He now has almost 8 million followers on YouTube. Wow. He's all over the place. The guy's name is Mr. Ballin, and his name is John B. Allen. So he just took the B. Allen and put Ballin, becomes Mr. Ballin. And he's former U.S. Navy SEAL. And during 2020, he decided to tell a story that he had personally of this visit to a ski lodge where he basically heard the ghost of, I forget, it's his father-in-law, something like that, and saw this ghost descend into the bottom of the basement right in front of his eyes in the middle of their bedroom. And then he started to tell more and more stories, and it's turned into this entire channel of horror stories. We calls it the Strange, Dark, and Mysterious. So it's not pure horror like we think of. I mean, it's all true tales. So he does a lot of like a missing 411 stories, or, just whatever kind of stories that he can find. Somebody going into, he does a lot of these where like 3 places that people weren't supposed to go, but they went anyway. And then he tells the story of, how they just a horrible death or those kinds of things. And it's really interesting. I mean, I cannot get enough of it. And I've wondered why that is.
Huh.
And I think it's because, it's because he's dealing, first of all, in true stories. They're completely, most of them are complete freak things. They're so unusual, and yet they're real. And it's this broad genre of horror. I mean, just any kind of a horror thing you can possibly think of.
Just scary stories, right?
Some of them are scary. Some of them are, but they're not all scary in like in a scare sort of a way. They're, somebody's trying to, one of the stories he tells that I played my girls, we went up to Yellowstone last week, was these kids are swimming in this hot pool stream, and they enjoy the day so much that they spend too long there and it gets dark, and then they have to go back to the car in the dark, and half the group says, well, we're going to go back on the trail, and the other group says, no, we're not going to do that. So the group that didn't, they try and find a shortcut, and they have to jump over some streams. And so they jump over the first stream, no problem. Second stream, no problem. Third stream, the three of them hold hands and they jump over the stream and they land and they make it safe. But oh no, the ledge gives way and they all fall into the stream, and the water is 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Instant burn, 3rd degrees. The two guys jump out of the water as fast as they can. They're all screaming at the top of their lungs, but this one poor girl is stuck in this water. She can't get out. All the people run over, they pull her out of the water, and they manage to get her to the hospital. She has 3rd-degree burns on 100% of her body, and she dies 18 hours later, excruciating pain. So that's a kind of a story that he tells. And I mean, that is horror if there was ever horror, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
And it's like, why are people so obsessed with this? And I find it absolutely fascinating to think through just different levels of what a podcast like that is doing. And I can't get enough of it, but I hope it's not a bad addiction that it's become. I hope that I'm listening to it with a little bit of discernment, and he tries to give that too, but it's interesting to me.
Well, why do you always want to slow down and see the car accident and see what would be a grotesque thing? And it is gross, but you still want to see it. We've got that interest, or at least curiosity in the macabre, for sure. Yeah.
And so I'm telling the story. Is it revealing something evil about yourself? Why I have an interest in something that's macabre, and why do I do that? And
Yeah, I think a lot of Christians make that argument. Actually, Christians would say, these things, these kind of horror things, are based on fear, and so as Christians, we worship a God who's not a God of fear. Whatever, we don't fear the world, etc. And so you're feeding fear into yourself, and so it's wrong. That's the argument that they would make. And on the surface, I can understand that, and it may be relevant in some cases for sure. Mm-hmm. But I also think there's another side that reflects what I often say, is in a lot of horror stories, it's a primal fear, and so it can be bad, but it can be good. What I mean by that is the essence of a lot of the slasher movies, with the kids, and sure, they could be exploitative, sexually and all this, but if you look at the genre as a whole, it by and large is a story that embodies, it doesn't even have to say so on out loud. It just embodies the notion that misbehavior leads to negative consequences, in its most primal sense, and showing that those, kids having sex and then they get killed by the serial killer or whatever, right? It always starts out with they do what they're not supposed to do. They go and party and take drugs, whatever, and that leads them, into, now in more recent versions, less of that is in the story, but I still think the classic one that we're drawn to of those kinds of stories is that notion of the macabre desire to see the consequences. Also, I would argue to people, it's good in the sense that it feeds in you a holy fear of righteousness, meaning not that you save yourself by being righteous, but it's just, the negative consequences of sin is intended to elicit in you a righteous behavior to some degree, and the Bible does that as well. So that's what, again, I'm not saying it's all acceptable. I'm just saying that's what I would say to those Christians who just dismiss it all with it just builds fear, and for me, the classic example or the classic analogy is, well, look, if you're swimming in the ocean and I see a shark coming at you, I will want to use fear to get you out of that water, because if I don't use fear, you won't get out and you'll get eaten, that kind of a thing, and so that's healthy fear.
Or like Jesus saying, fear not the one who can harm your body, fear the one who can throw you body and soul into hell.
Yeah.
I just preached that today. Believe it or not.
Yeah. Let's talk about zombies.
Yeah, zombies.
Let's do.
Because so it's my favorite genre, and again, I'll come at it from the genre, but my favorite, one of my favorite all-time series is Walking Dead. And I've watched every last episode, and they weren't always good, and they weren't always good seasons, but that's of course one of my favorite seasons. But also my favorite series is the 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. Great.
I would just watch that today too.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
28 days. Yep. 28 days later.
And of course, one of my favorite movies of all time is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies because it combines a great zombie story with a great Jane Austen story. And I love both of those. Believe it or not, they can fit. But, what I always argue is to people is, and look, I know that it's not for everyone, I wouldn't argue it for everyone, but, and I, when I was younger, I hated them. And I think that I would say that, the George Romero stuff was pretty grotesque. But even then, he was making social commentary. But the essence of what most zombie stories are, and the Shaun of the Dead, the I Am Legend we mentioned, World War Z, I like that one too. One of the essential components is that because the zombies are humans without souls, so to speak, right? They're just raw. They're not human, and the way that they're not human is they don't have the human soul. They're dead, and so they're just machines that are killing. And so that justifies the fact that we need to destroy them, right? But the essence of most of these stories, and it's really strong in the 28 Days and 28 Weeks series, is that I see this in a lot of them, a lot of the series, intrinsic or not, and it's a comparison of two ethics. The ethic of sacrifice or self-sacrifice versus the ethic of survival. And I see that as the ethic of Christianity versus the ethic of evolutionism. But nonetheless, self-sacrifice versus survival. And in the good zombie stories, it's the heroic humans who sacrifice themselves to some degree, maybe fully their life, or they'll go back to try to save someone even though it endangers them. That's the essence of defining who are the heroes and who are the good guys and who are the people who retain their humanity. And the bad guys and the villains or whatever, the people who are bad are the ones who seek to protect themselves and survive at the expense of others. And there's nothing more ethically, there's nothing more Christian than that, And so the genre itself is just embodies that regularly. But I would say that I remember 28 Weeks Later, that was the literal theme of it too, because like one of the main characters, it was literally, he was haunted by the fact that he left his wife to die to protect himself, and then she somehow survives. And so he has to face his children and her knowing that he protected himself, So that's one of the elements. Of course, the zombie thing is also done for social commentary as well. But to me, that's why I like the movies and the series that do that, because it really reinforces in me an ethic that I need to have reinforced. I'm not a naturally self-sacrificial person, and I don't think it's easy thing. We need to be reinforced with our stories to be sacrificial, because if we're ever called upon in any way to do so, I would hope that I would, but I acknowledge my essential selfish nature it might be difficult. And so having these stories reinforces those values in a good way. I'm not saying it's for everyone, because there is some grossness to it, but that's the moral component that really appeals to me.
Yeah. And that is human nature at its basic, which is self-preservation at all costs, or self-enrichment at all costs. Brian, you've got a novel coming out that you mentioned early on, the inspiration for some of your work from this genre. Some years ago, you put together a short film that you are developing into a novel called Cruel Logic. And we'll talk about this at more length in a future program. But how does that exemplify and use this idea of horror to convey some spiritual truth?
Well, this is another thing where serial killer movies or stories, right? That's a whole genre, right? And some years ago, I kind of came to the realization and conclusion that the serial killers, we've always had them, more so in recent generations, right? But they go all the way back to the ancient time. But they become a fascination and a genre of storytelling that I don't think was as much around as several hundred years ago. But I think that it is the modern sort of scientific adaptation of the vampire, So the serial killer is the modern vampire. It's not supernatural. He's natural. It's a naturalistic vampire, right? And of course, the question is, is it a psychological thing? Is it a spiritual thing? Is it is it physical? Those are the issues that they stress. But just the storylines in and of itself of modern serial killers, I think, is the modern version of the vampire story, and that's one of the reasons why I find myself sometimes drawn to them as well. It's hard to really get into them because they do it wears on you. Like there was this on Netflix real recently did a great series on who's the cannibal?
Jeffrey Dahmer?
Jeffrey Dahmer, yeah. I think it was called Dahmer. And it was really well done, but it was a series. And the guy who played him was fantastic. And they had the guys who tracked him down. But it was very sort of true to the events. They tried to stick true. I looked it up. But gosh, it just so many hours of that, and you really get the sort of the darkness. You feel that darkness, and it's just like I don't want to watch too much of this stuff. It's interesting and it's challenging and it's thoughtful, but I don't want to become too absorbed in it because it's so dark. And that's where I would agree with some Christians who, at least their concern is that you're getting too dark, or whatever. You're wallowing in the darkness, and we shouldn't be there, right? So it's the need to find a balance, in there. But yeah, that's what I think. And so, we'll talk about it on another show of yours, but it's the story of a serial killer. It's not a true story, but it's the story of a serial killer who is a philosophy professor, and he captures university professors and he debates them. And the topic of his debate is his moral right to kill them.
Mm.
So is this like an expanded version of your short story movie?
It absolutely is. Actually, the short film you're referring to was one scene out of the movie that I wrote many years ago. And I was never able to make it as a movie. So I finally came to the point where I realized I have to write it as a novel because the story has to get out. And if it's not going to be made as a movie, I got to get it as a novel. And so I've incorporated, though, it's not just that. I also bring into it's sort of like two strong storylines going at the same time. And there's the serial killer story. And then something that's been, I don't want to I'll talk about it on another show. But anyway, yeah, that's the heart of it.
Well, here's a question for you talking about serial killer stuff. So you got things like American Psycho, Dexter, especially Dexter. That's kind of a flip of the whole thing. And he knows he has no conscience, but yet he does. It's surreal, right?
Yeah.
But it makes me think of, go back to Jason, Michael Myers, Halloween, and Friday the 13th. Those
Freddy
are serial
Krueger,
killer shows, right?
Mm-hmm.
But really, I usually think of them as slasher shows, but they're actually serial killer shows.
Yeah, that's true.
And you brought up earlier that the serial killer is kind of a modern way
vampire
about vampire, but also putting it into naturalistic, materialistic sorts of things. But when you think about those, especially those two franchises, those serial killers they seem to be demonic creatures, right? They're not.
Yeah.
You don't get any sense that these are purely human. There's something supernatural about them.
That was part of the subtext of the adaptation of the graphic novel From Hell, which was about Jack the Ripper, that they made into a movie. I think Johnny Depp and Heather Graham were in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was kind of the subtext of that story.
Interesting.
And
there's a Star Trek episode, original series, where
right.
they have Jack the Ripper on another world, right? So you get almost kind of a supernatural sort of a thing there in the weird Gene Roddenberry.
And the thing that blew your mind is that the actor who played the character was the guy who voiced the character of Piglet in all the Winnie the Pooh movies. Suddenly, you get this voice of Piglet who's yelling, "Die, die, everybody, die!"
Red Jack.
Red Jack, yeah. But he was also, the clue was that his name was Mr. Hengist. And of course, Hengist and Horsa were the two Saxon chiefs who led to the Night of the Long Knives, where they killed all the British chiefs at a dinner where they were supposed to be making peace. King Vortigern and his chiefs went, and they were slaughtered by Hengist and Horsa. Again, the idea of the knife. But the Jack the Ripper trope was developed into a series a few years ago by BBC, or might have been ITV. But anyway, Rupert Penry Jones and Steve Pemberton, Phil Davis, a series called Whitechapel. Which
is that good?
Ran 4 seasons. Yes, it was. It began with a killer who was recreating the Ripper killings. And so the Steve Pemberton was a member of a comedy troupe years ago called the League of Gentlemen. He and one of his colleagues from that series, Reese Shearsmith, do a long-running series on BBC called Inside Number 9, which is brilliant. Wouldn't recommend it as a Christian series, but if you enjoy really good writing from an anthology series, Inside Number 9. Anyway, Pemberton plays this ripperologist who's studied everything, knows everything there is to know. He's a world-renowned ripperologist who conducts tours of Whitechapel and suddenly he's under suspicion because the murders that are being committed are so similar to what happened in 1888 that they think, okay, he's got to be doing it because nobody else knows that much about the Ripper. Well, they finally catch the guy, but then they get 3 more seasons out of it where other crimes begin happening in and around Whitechapel that emulate other crimes that had happened in the 18th century, the 17th century, the whatever. So they bring him in as like an archivist. And then when you get to the 4th season, they get really more overtly supernatural with the series. They bring in a character played by Angela Pleasance, who's the daughter of Donald Pleasance. You might remember him. He's the bald actor who was one of the guys who played Blofeld in the Bond films. He was in the one of the series. What was the one that was set in one of the slasher series? The not Friday the 13th, but the Halloween series. Michael Myers. He played the doctor who treated Michael Myers. Anyway, his daughter plays this character named Louise Ivor. Dresses in red. Just say that fast and you'll get the reference. Louise Ivor. Yeah. But they do a really good job of rolling it out slowly. It's not overt. It's not obvious. And as things are literally going to hell for this, division of the Metropolitan Police, they're working in Whitechapel, Jack the Ripper's old stomping grounds. You begin to realize this just ain't natural. So
That's cool.
It's a very interesting 4-season arc that we're going back and rewatching now, and we're just into the 4th season. And it was like, I didn't notice all of this stuff when we watched through it the first time. Now, you've got some of the police characters who are people of faith, but it's the kind of faith that you see most often, like, okay, raised Roman Catholic, he's got his little, saint whatever medal, and he holds it up as a talisman. That's not really how this works, but it can be instructive to Christians who understand the way the gospel and the Holy Spirit work and this supernatural war against literal evil that walks among us.
Derek, there's the question I need to ask is it an accident that Sir Charles Warren, who found the plaque on top of Mount Hermon with the curse from the Watchers, also happened to be the London Metro Police Department officer who oversaw the Jack the Ripper case?
He was the superintendent of Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, in 1888 when the investigations began. Yeah, when Sharon discovered that, and she said, "Do you know that he did that?" This was before she wrote book 2 of the Red Wing saga. Like, I had no idea. So
she put it in there?
Oh, yeah. The Mount Hermon stone, the Watcher stone, is in the Red Wing saga. Now, the official story is that Warren sent it back to London to the British Museum, and it was ignored. It was forgotten until 1903, when Charles Claremont Ganneau opened the box and said, "Oh, we found this stone that Sir Charles found back in 1869." It's like, really? I mean, it got back to London and it just sat there for 33 years. 33. No, in the novel, her novel, it was open when it got back to London and something got out. So
now, see, that's interesting because when we're talking about all this stuff about Jack the Ripper and the potential supernatural ramifications, it made me think of a collection of short stories. It was written back in the 80s after the first Batman movie came out. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge Batman fan. So it was called The Further Adventures of Batman. In one of the stories, there was a student at Gotham University who had found this knife in a collection that began to talk to him. And it turns out that it's the same demon, this god, that was behind Jack the Ripper and a number of other serial killers throughout history. And it's kind of written in journal form from this kid's perspective, and it causes him to do all these murders. That's how Batman gets drawn in, because he's investigating these murders. And without letting too much out of the bag, by the end of the story, when Batman finds this guy and is interrogating him, he's telling him about the nature of this artifact, this knife that he has, that it sings to him, that it tells him what to do, that it went by all these names, and Jack the Ripper was one of them. And I always thought that was a really interesting comic twist on the Jack the Ripper trope and the supernatural implications.
Judd, you through your school, the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, you offer courses on monsterology, for lack of a better term. Why do you teach that? What kind of things can people learn if they're interested in seeing some of the theological truth behind these tropes?
Well, that there are supernatural, historical, biblical bases for all of these creatures that are preternatural. They have both material and supernatural qualities to them, like the vampire, like werewolves, reanimants and revenants, like you find in the Frankenstein story, ghouls, zombies. People would be surprised how many, just how much biblical context there is for these creatures. And when you're looking at them through the lens of the Bible, then they take on another significance, because the origins of them are all demonic. They're all rooted in some sort of demonic genesis.
And the website is tioba.org.
Well, now that one is defunct. If people are interested, they can go to burtonbeyond.net/IBA.
Okay.
And they can contact me at professorburton@yahoo.com if they're interested.
We'll update the links on the website. I know that in the past we've pointed to the former address, but as time goes on, the internet changes. Go to the Wayback Machine. The internet never forgets everything.
Can I throw something out, Derek?
Absolutely.
Since we're talking about Jack the Ripper and stuff too, so this is an Easter egg in my new novel of the serial killer, and it's just something I did. I'm not going to talk about it except every once in a while, but so it's a theological novel, and so I wrestle with the problem of evil and the existence of God and all that kind of stuff. But every fictional character in my novel is the name of a real serial killer in history. Now, obviously, I've avoided the ones that everyone knows, like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? But there's a few that some who might be more knowledgeable might go, "Oh, Elizabeth Bathory, I've heard that name before." And then except for one character, and that's the detective whose name is the name of the world's best Christian apologist in the 20th century, Cornelius Van Til. And then on the campus, every building, how buildings have their names, and the names of every building are based on names of possible Jack the Ripper suspects.
Okay.
But and the point of it was just, it's sort of like original sin. It's just like, how can I express this notion that we are all Jack the Rippers or we are all serial killers in our souls before the living God? In other words, we're all God haters.
There is none
unless we're
righteous.
saved. That kind of thing. So,
well, we're looking forward to that. Sharon has done a lot of study, a lot more than any normal person would want to do on Jack the Ripper. So she will definitely enjoy the finding those Easter eggs. So make a note. We will get a copy of that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
I will very much appreciate it. Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, Dr. Judd Burton, another fascinating discussion. We'll come up with another topic for next month. I guess the bottom line, if just one final thought here, if I could just toss out one thought, it's horror can be instructive, but you got to read it. You got to read it or watch it with discernment and with an eye to how far it tracks away from the Bible. Guys, Brian, any final thoughts?
No,
yep.
It's all good.
Judd?
No,
Nope.
I'm good.
All right. Well, Doug, last word if you choose.
Come on, Doug.
Thank you, Derek. It was a good word.
All right.
Yeah, you did. You got it, Derek.
All right.
Good.
Well, fellas, we'll talk again next month. Check the notes below this program, whether you're watching or listening, and you'll find links to the websites for Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, Dr. Judd Burton, and they'll be back next month as we continue this Iron and Myth series, exploring the supernatural from a Christian perspective. Coming up, well, the local authorities at a town near Fresno, California, found what appeared to be an illegal laboratory. Now, normally when you think of that, you think, oh, okay, meth, crack, something like that. No, infectious diseases. And all the evidence points back to China. Bless their pointy little heads. That's straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Everyone learns differently, and that's why we write fiction.
It is. I find that some people love to read nonfiction, but there's something about fiction that psychologists say breaks that fourth wall. You no longer doubt what you're reading. You get so engrossed in the story that you learn. You can learn propaganda or you can learn God's truth.
Absolutely. So, yes, we write nonfiction books, but we are also using the gift of storytelling to try to teach spiritual warfare and spiritual truths. And during the months of August and September, we're offering all 10 of our novels at 20% off.
All 10 at 20% off? That's crazy.
That's
That
right.
is really, really a good deal. And now's the time if you want to buy gifts for birthdays or Christmas or whatever gift-giving season it is. It could even be Mother's Day next year. This is the time to save 20% on all of our fiction. And Derek's fiction is really, really good if you've never read it.
And Sharon's Red Wing Saga, 8 novels so far. She's hard at work on number 9.
9.
If you want to get engrossed in characters who are really grappling with the supernatural and trying to make sense of that world while teaching the divine counsel concepts that we try to communicate here, get involved in the Red Wing Saga. Again, all 8 of those novels, plus my 2 novels, The God Conspiracy and Iron Dragons, 20% off now only at our online store. That's gilberthouse.org/store. Walking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net. Also at YouTube, of course, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/GilbertHouse. But best of all, as I said earlier, make sure you get our mobile app. You can get us on iOS, Android, and Amazon Kindle Fire devices. Also Roku and Apple TV. We've got versions for that as well. And while we're taking a moment for some boilerplate announcements and what have you, want to let you know that the project that we've called Build Barn Better is making real progress. As I'm recording this tonight, and this will be about a week and a half out of date by the time you hear this, so the project will be even farther along. But as you're hearing this, we just this week had the new service line for the electric for the pole barn, our 30 by 40 foot shop building on the property. Came with the house. It's like the cost of living here when we moved to the Ozarks was such, it's like we got the pole barn tossed in free along with the rest of the property. We didn't go looking for this extra property, but it's here. and now we're putting it to use. A new floor is down. It's an epoxy floor with a 15-year warranty. They took a look at the electric system and said, yeah, you had enough to run a few lights out here, but that's about it. If you want to run HVAC, which, is kind of important if you're going to use it as a workspace, you need to upgrade. So they ran a new line on Thursday and Friday just a couple of weeks ago, and that is now in. When this is complete, when the new lights have been installed out there, LEDs replacing the old fluorescent tubes, then we will move on to insulation and then getting the mini split installed so we can keep the place climate controlled. And we want to thank you for your support in making this happen. More information online at gilberthouse.org/donate. Also, we've got a new streaming video service out there. If you're interested in any of our video teachings, you can always access those for as little as $3. As little as $3 at gilberthouse.org/video. Well, this was a story that popped up on the radar just a couple of weeks ago, and it gets weirder and weirder. This was the discovery by local authorities in Reedley, California, which is about 25 miles southeast of Fresno, of an illegal laboratory. And the lab came to light when a local building inspector was checking out what was supposed to be an unused warehouse. They thought it was a vacant warehouse and found a hose running into a back wall that wasn't supposed to be there. So the inspector got inside, gained access to the property somehow, and found that this lab, not making illegal drugs, it was actually conducting tests on, according to the CDC, as reported by National Review, more than 800 chemicals found on site and 20 infectious agents, including hepatitis B and C, streptococcus pneumonia, chlamydia, rubella, otherwise known as German measles, and herpes 1 and 5. Federal investigators chasing the money found it registered to a company called Prestige Biotech, which is registered in the state of Nevada, but not to do business in the state of California. But when they tried to track down Prestige Biotech, the trail led to fake addresses and unverifiable addresses, empty buildings and unverifiable addresses in China. Now, this is really disturbing because, as I say, again, this was in a warehouse building. This was not in a biosecure laboratory where you would normally work with infectious diseases like this. BSL-3 labs typically, to give you an idea from what I've read, biosecurity level 2, which is one step up from just the basic, like wash your hands, wear a mask. BSL-2 is like what you get at your local dentist's office. BSL-3, when you're working with stuff like this. BSL-4 is like highest level moon suit, working with stuff like Ebola type biosecurity. But this was in a lab. This was in a warehouse. So it's not likely that containment was really a consideration here. What were they doing with this? Who knows? But the development that came out of the story now is that this business that located in this small town in Fresno County apparently received a $360,000 grant from the state of California from Governor Gavin Newsom's program called Go Biz. It was a tax credit allotment of $360,000 to bring this shadowy Chinese company to Fresno County, California, to conduct research on infectious diseases. What the heck? And back in 2019, it was actually making local business journals praising the government of California, Governor Newsom's administration, for bringing 10 new jobs to the region through this medical technology company. But obviously, it wasn't doing what they thought it was doing. And again, as federal investigators, because you get local, state, and feds involved in this right now, so far they come up with nothing. Empty buildings and unverifiable addresses back in China behind this mysterious lab in California that received $360,000 of California taxpayer money to help set up this facility, apparently, according to the California Globe. So, Governor Newsom, to you we say, Bless your pointy little head. Well, we've got a small conference to tell you about coming up in October. This is getting closer than I think. The older I get, the more I realize that time actually does move faster. Speed of light is not a constant, I'm sure. The older we get, the slower light moves or something. This will be a small little gathering in Valley City, North Dakota. Valley City is along I-94 between Fargo and Jamestown. Places I've been. I've actually been on Turtle Mountain in Jamestown there. Highest point in the state, about 360 feet above average terrain. North Dakota is a very flat state, which is beautiful when you watch off to the west or the southwest and you see these thunderstorms rolling across the prairie. It is absolutely stunning. This is it's called the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering at the Valley City Eagles Club, October 27th and 28th. I will be there alone. Sharon will be working hard at work on Book 9 of the Red Wing Saga. And so looking forward to this gathering. Kind of unique because it's not specifically a Christian conference or anything like this. This is a best practices gathering of small farmers in North Dakota, South Dakota, western Minnesota. And they last year had a pastor preaching, and this year they invited me. So I'll be talking about giants in the Bible and why they're relevant. Giants, gods, and dragons, in fact, as that'll be just a few days before Halloween. So maybe we'll share a little bit with some of the stranger parts of the Bible and why they're relevant in Christian theology. Again, it's the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering. You can find out more at our website, gilberthouse.org. Look in the right-hand column at upcoming events, and there's a link to the Facebook page for the gathering. And looking forward to visiting my mom's home state. That's something I haven't done literally in 45 years. So that should be a lot of fun. Meanwhile, if you get a spare moment and you feel so inclined, you decide to leave a review of A View from the Bunker at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold. We certainly appreciate that. Our announcer at the opening of the program, the inimitable D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.